Is 1 Corinthians chapter 6 verses 9 and 10 a clear prohibition of same-gender married relationships? That's the question I want to dive into today in our current series titled Why I'm a Gay-Affirming Christian. My name is Brett Silford, pastor at the Table, a church in Sac City, Texas, and it's such a privilege to welcome you to Table Talk, where each week I bring you ideas and insights from Christian theology, spirituality, culture that just help you become a more thoughtful, insightful, and hopefully a wonderful human being. So this is part 4 of our series, and like I mentioned, I want to unpack another passage from the Bible that's sometimes referred to as one of the, quote, clobber passages because of the way it's often been used to intellectually clobber LGBTQ people, so to speak. So let's go ahead and hear what 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verses 9 and 10 has to say. It writes, "Do you not know that the wrongdoers will not inherit the kingdom of God? Do not be deceived, neither fornicators, idolaters, adulterers, male prostitutes, sodomites, thieves, the greedy, drunkards, revilers," I'm guessing that's bad, I'm not totally sure what a reviler is, "or robbers will inherit the kingdom of God." Okay, so the two key terms here in Greek, which of course is what the Bible was written in the New Testament, not English, not even the King James, I know, wild, the two terms are malakoi, which translates to male prostitute. Second is the term arsenokoitai, which the NRSV translates as sodomite. Other translations use the term homosexual. Now, for the sake of length, I won't delve into the controversy surrounding malakoi, since there's no real, well, at least not real controversy. There's some scholarly questions or controversy, but not like among average Christians, about the idea that sexuality without any restraint, i.e. prostitution, is bad. That's not like a big debate. So with that in mind, let me turn my attention to the term arsenokoitai, translated in this version as sodomite. Now, what does arsenokoitai mean? Well, literally, it means man bed. It's a combination of two Greek words, arsenos, which means male or man, and koita, which is bed. So you put them together, and there you go, man bed. Now, you say, that's sort of a weird term, and yes, I agree, and honestly, it's not one that really shows up in other ancient writings outside of the Apostle Paul, or I shouldn't say just Paul, but really the Bible, and specifically in the Greek version. So because of this, a number of more traditionalist scholars have argued that Paul, as they're trying to kind of discern what does this term mean, man bed, because that is kind of vague, so they've argued that perhaps Paul, in using this term, or maybe even coining this term, that he might have the Greek translation of the Old Testament, and specifically Leviticus chapter 20, verse 13, in mind when he used this word. You see, in the Greek version of Leviticus 20, you might recall from my last video that says, if a man lies with a man, is with a woman, he should be put to death. So in that passage in Greek, you have the terms arsenos, male, koita, bed. So certain conservative scholars will say, okay, so perhaps Paul, as he's penning 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 9, maybe he's drawing from the male bed language of Leviticus 20. Now, to that I would say, yeah, perhaps. I mean, granted, it is always a bit sketchy to say things like, now, what Paul really had in mind, and then act super confident about that. Now, having said that, I think what other scholars, for example, Robin Scroggs, point out is that later rabbis also used the Hebrew version of arsenokoitai, but when they used it, they were referring specifically to the active partner in a pederastic relationship. Pederasty, that's man-boy love. I mean, this is basically like pedophilia. And so what this shows is the challenge of using the history of a word as definitive proof of its meaning at a later date. In other words, even if you break down arsenokoitai into its two root words and then say, see, they tie back in Leviticus, you still have to wrestle with the fact that later rabbis use the Hebrew version of that same term to refer to man-boy love, which honestly, that interpretation would seem to align or be more in favor of an LGBTQ affirming position. In other words, to try and sort of sum this up, you sort of have to make an interpretive decision with the term arsenokoitai. If you tie the term back in Leviticus chapter 18, then you start to form an argument saying, hey, I think that, condemns, that's sort of the New Testament using the Old Testament to condemn modern forms of same-gender sexuality. However, if you tie it into the way later rabbis use the term, well, then you would argue, arsenokoitai, that's condemning pedophilia, which obviously is not the same thing as modern gay adult relationships among peers. In other words, imagine you're a modern Bible interpreter and you've got to translate this term arsenokoitai. Do you choose a term like homosexual or sodomite, thinking Leviticus 18, or do you choose to say pedophile? Obviously, that's a huge interpretive decision. And yet the truth is that in the end, it's really difficult to venture more than an educated guess as to what exactly Paul was referring to in this passage, since we honestly don't have many other uses of the word in ancient literature, or barely even in Paul's writings. So here's how the scholar Marty Nicenen kind of sums it up. He says, the question of the exact meaning of the juxtaposition malakos and arsenokoites thus remains obscure. He says, this is especially the case regarding the word arsenokoitai. He continues, the modern concept of homosexuality should by no means be read into Paul's text, nor can we assume that Paul's words in 1 Corinthians 6:9 therefore condemn all homosexual relations in all times and places and ways. He says the meaning of the words are too vague to justify this claim, and Paul's words should not be used for generalizations that go beyond this experience and world. End quote. So, as you can see, saying really confidently that 1 Corinthians 6, 9, and 10, it says sodomites or homosexuals shall not inherit the kingdom, and so therefore the Bible says it, and that settles it for me. It's actually, we aren't really sure what that meant. And instead, I think what this shows is sort of the theme of my last few videos, that because the Bible was written in a very different time and culture, we just have to be careful of saying, I know what this says definitively, when the truth is more complicated than we thought. And by the way, for those wondering, the entire argument I just unpacked, it would also apply to the passage 1 Timothy chapter 1, verse 10, which also includes the term arsenokoitai in a long list of bad things. So, with all that in mind, that is all for today. If you enjoyed this video, please go ahead, comment below, and ensure you don't miss future episodes. Go ahead and subscribe to my YouTube channel or podcast, most anywhere podcasts are offered, by searching Brett Tilford Table Talk. I love you all. Grace and peace.